Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
This might have been the day when Theresa May and the EU could signal that there was enough progress in Brexit talks to start moving on to the next stage. But it wasn't to be. The main obstacle is what to do about the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Now, earlier today, it seemed the issue of the border had been resolved. But the DUP in Belfast objected to any suggestion that Northern Ireland could be treated differently to the rest of the UK. In the last hour, Ireland's Prime Minister accused Theresa May of backing away from an agreement. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, was in Brussels.
Here to reveal the deal, or was it slipping away? The Prime Minister didn't exactly look delighted, but after weeks of trying to grip a deal, it seemed it was on. She'd only parked up for lunch, but it turned into a long lunch, and then later and later. By tea time, look at their faces. It was off for today.
We've been negotiating hard and a lot of progress has been made, and on many of the issues there is a common understanding. But it's clear, crucially, that we want to move forward together. But on a couple of issues, some differences do remain, which require further negotiation and consultation. Those will continue, but we will reconvene before the end of the week. And I am also confident that we will conclude this positively.
Didn't feel very positive this afternoon.
Despite our best efforts and the significant progress we and our teams have made over the past days on the three main withdrawal issues, it was not possible to reach a complete agreement today.
But listen to this. Eager MEPs this morning saying we're the team. Sure-ish, but the UK government would give enough to make it work, even despite what's been described as a contradiction over the Irish border.
As long as we have the commitment that there will be full alignment, it's okay, there will be no border.
So as far as you're concerned, sir, the text includes a concession from the British government over the Northern Irish border.
Yeah, but is that a surprise to you? I mean, the British government created for itself a contradiction.
I'm optimistic that it is possible, 50-50, to have something, but we have to be sure that on citizens' rights everything is okay.
But watch this. As suggestions of a deal became the accepted truth, the DUP, whose support Theresa May needs, slammed on the brakes.
We have been very clear. Northern Ireland must leave the European Union on the same terms as the rest of the United Kingdom, and we will not accept any form of regulatory divergence which separates Northern Ireland.
As time ticked on, 20 minutes later, the Prime Minister broke off her meetings in Brussels to phone Mrs Foster. I understand the DUP made it plain she could not support the proposed deal. The precise opposite to the Irish leader, who has pushed and pushed, who talked of his shock.
I am surprised and disappointed that the British government now appears not to be in a position to conclude what was agreed earlier today. I accept that the Prime Minister has asked for more time, and I know that she faces many challenges, and I acknowledge that she is negotiating in good faith.
Despite all the hope, all the anticipation, the negotiating teams leave Brussels today without a deal.
Those close to her claim it's not just the reliance on the DUP that sunk the deal today. She was meant to be home by now, but Theresa May's still here talking, stuck, no steps further forward. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Brussels.
So, as we've been hearing, the issue of the Irish border proved the major sticking point today. Our Ireland correspondent, Chris Buckler, has been looking at why the border has proved so contentious. He joins us live now from the border near Newry. Chris.
Yeah, George, and all along this border, you'll find derelict old huts like this, former customs posts. Now, no one wants a return of these, or indeed what's being called a hard border. However, unionists are starting to ask questions about what could be the price for that. They fear it could mean closer ties to the Republic of Ireland and potentially new divisions within the UK, specifically between Northern Ireland and Britain. That is a politically sensitive issue and also an awkward one for Theresa May, given her reliance on the DUP in the Commons. The journey to a Brexit deal is proving far from easy. The UK and the EU still have to find a way through the many problems posed by these border roads. The Irish government are insisting that there should be no change along the 310 miles that connect Northern Ireland and the Republic, that this should remain an invisible border. South of that dividing line in Dundalk, which will stay a part of the European Union, people started the day believing there was the prospect of a December deal. And for owners of shops like this, keeping trading rules and regulations the same across this island would be quite a gift.
There's no restrictions at all. You can, if you take the stuff down, you can take it with you in the morning. You haven't to go through the customs. And I remember what it was like. You'd have lost a day going through the customs in Newry and then Dundalk and the whole, you know, it's just, after a while, it's like everything else. When it's gone a while, you forget how bad it was, you know.
But the DUP hold quite a few cards in what's proving to be a grown-up game of poker. They worry that the trade-off for ensuring customs posts don't return to this island's roads could be new divisions and trading differences within the UK. Potentially new checks at ports for ships travelling between Northern Ireland and Britain, what's been called a border in the Irish Sea. And north of the border in Newry, many felt the Conservatives had no choice but to listen to the Democratic Unionists, because they hold the balance of power at Westminster.
May needs the DUP at the moment.
Could that scupper this deal then?
I think it might, but because if they pull the plug, it'll be a general election.
Still part of the UK, so that's the way it'll work.
But these are towns which rely on euros as well as pounds, and they worry that any border could put off visitors and their cash.
See, if they did put a hard border, it'd more or less destroy towns like Newry and Enniskillen and all border towns.
Currently, it seems difficult to see a way out of the negotiations that will satisfy everyone. But the government needs to come up with solutions for this border, and fast. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Newry.
Well, in a moment we'll talk to our political editor Laura Koonsberg, but first to our Europe editor Katja Adler. Katja, they obviously got incredibly close to some sort of agreement. What's the reaction there now?
Well, Brussels has been left a bit open-mouthed this evening. No one involved in the negotiations saw this coming. The EU had its pens metaphorically poised to sign off on the next phase of Brexit negotiations. Negotiators did have at the back of their minds that perhaps Ireland would put the brakes on a breakthrough in Brexit talks, but it seems that the DUP was the understudy for that role, striding to centre stage at the crucial last moment, all while the Prime Minister was in the building you see behind me there, having a power working lunch with the European Commission chief. Now, EU diplomats describe how the Prime Minister suddenly found herself with her back against the wall and the prospect of her government crumbling. They're not sure what is going to happen next. There's lots of brave talk here in Brussels this evening that what happened today wasn't a failure, that talks will resume by the end of the week, that the two sides are closer than ever before on key Brexit issues. That is all true, but at the same time there is a return to frustration in EU circles that they find themselves, that is, the European parties, treading Brexit water while waiting for internal politics to play out in the UK.
All right, Katja, thank you very much. And as I said, we can talk to Laura now. Laura, the DUP has its objections. The Irish Prime Minister is disappointed. I mean, where does all this leave Theresa May tonight?
Well, George, in a pretty tricky spot, that has to be said. Nothing about this was ever going to be easy, but this unexpected turn of events today has left her looking pretty embarrassed. Does it mean that it's all over? No, of course not a bit of it. Sometimes in these kinds of talks, there has to be a bust-up before there's a breakthrough. Each side very much wants a deal. That fundamental still remains the same. But is there a clear way through, an obvious solution to this standoff? No, not at all. And in terms of getting to that deal, like any kind of political project, Theresa May knows that she can't please all of the people all of the time.
but she has to be able to please enough of the people, enough of it at a time, to be able to get all the different factions to come together at the critical moments. And it seems today that so much effort had gone almost to that point for her only to have her plans dashed by that small Northern Irish party on whose support she relies on at home. This is going to be a very difficult few days. We might see her back here before the end of the week. She knew this was not going to be straightforward, but today is a surprise shock that she could well have done without. And remember, there's no way that Theresa May would have come to Brussels today unless she believed that a deal was extremely close. The British side have made a misjudgment here, and no one quite knows what happens next.
Laura, thank you.
As Theresa May and Brexit Secretary David Davis arrived in Brussels this morning, expectations were high that she was there to sign off on the first phase of the Brexit negotiations. By the time she left, just a couple of hours ago, it was clear that there is much more to do. The sticking point, again, is the Irish border. Theresa May cannot proceed without the agreement of the Democratic Unionist Party, and at the last minute, they objected to talk of regulatory alignment between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. The Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, said he was disappointed. But in Brussels, they're still saying a deal is within reach. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is in Brussels. Gary.
Well, as you say, this was supposed to be the grand moment, the longed-for breakthrough in these Brexit divorce talks. It didn't happen largely because of Northern Ireland, and as so often when it comes to Northern Ireland, the impasse was supposed to be broken through with some ambiguous language. And the language they'd come up with was that phrase you were just referring to, continued regulatory alignment. What it meant was that you could have different customs zones either side of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic, and yet, as if by magic, there would be no need to have any customs control presence there. That language, over the course of the day, started spooking the DUP because they felt that the coverage was suggesting that they'd taken part in some kind of sellout. And instead of the choreography that was expected, that you really need for big occasions like this, this was a day that didn't so much unfold as unravel.
The Brexit Secretary set off from Downing Street. The Prime Minister would soon follow, careful stage managing for a big day, both heading for an RAF Northolt flight to Brussels.
The PM is once again having to get involved. Are you struggling to get the job done?
The first negotiator in this process from the beginning has been the Prime Minister.
But before the Prime Minister got to meet him, a delegation of members of the European Parliament got their briefing from the European Commission.
What about the money? What about the financial settlement? Is there a deal on the money?
Seems yes.
It seems yes, there is a deal on the money. So you're happy with that?
One of those at the briefing, a Belgian Green Party MEP, gave journalists his take on the draft agreement he'd just seen.
The paragraph on Ireland is paragraph 48, and it's not that long. I think it's 10 lines or so.
Before Theresa May's set-piece arrival for talks with Jean-Claude Juncker, the Belgian Green politician and others had framed the coverage of what she was planning to sign up to. Northern Ireland was staying in the single market, the instant headlines said. So, even before any announcement here, at Stormont, a tense DUP leader, Arlene Foster, raced to try to calm down that talk.
Well, we note that there's been quite a lot of speculation this morning emanating from the European Union exit talks, in particular around the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom border. So we wanted to come down and make a statement in relation to our position. We have been very clear. Northern Ireland must leave the European Union on the same terms as the rest of the United Kingdom, and we will not accept any form of regulatory divergence which separates Northern Ireland economically or politically from the rest of the UK.
Lunch with the European Commission President was briefly paused while Theresa May spoke to Arlene Foster by phone. Meanwhile, Scotland's First Minister tweeted there was no reason why other parts of the UK couldn't stay in the single market too. Wales's First Minister said he wanted continued participation in the single market, and the Mayor of London said he wanted a similar deal for the capital. But Theresa May had agreed regulatory alignment between Northern Ireland and the Republic, not membership of the single market for Northern Ireland. After her phone call with the DUP leader, Theresa May asked the European Commission President for some more time to calm things down.
But on a couple of issues, some differences do remain, which require further negotiation and consultation. Those will continue, but we will reconvene before the end of the week.
Mr Juncker said he still expected a deal this week and showed what sounded suspiciously to some like magnanimity in victory.
But I have to say that she's a tough negotiator and not an easy one. She's defending the point of view of Britain with all the energy we know she has.
Dublin watched Theresa May's progress through Brussels with disbelief. 4 hours later than planned, the Taoiseach, speaking in Dublin, said everyone would have to be patient.
I am surprised and disappointed that the British government now appears not to be in a position to conclude what was agreed earlier today. I accept that the Prime Minister has asked for more time, and I know that she faces many challenges, and I acknowledge that she is negotiating in good faith. But my position and that of the Irish Government is unequivocal, and it's supported by all of the parties in Dáil Éireann, and I believe the majority of people on these islands.
This was supposed to be the crowning moment of the day, the man who will chair the all-important European Council meeting next week, giving his blessing to the agreement on Brexit terms that opens the way to negotiating a future relationship and a transition. Now, they and we must wait.
Gary, this morning the news bulletins were full of optimism that something was actually going to happen. Either there was a miscalculation or a misunderstanding. What went wrong?
I think a lot of this comes down to the nature of the DUP. They're a small party that has often managed to walk the national, the international stage, sometimes belying the smallness of the actual forces. But today they panicked. They looked at the coverage that was being generated by some of the news that was swirling around here, some of the commentary that was swirling around here, and they felt they were the wrong side of one of those headlines that suggests you've been party to a sellout. And I think that's what happened. You've got a backdrop as well, a party that is very staunchly Brexiteer. I mean, it can make some Tory Brexiteers blush sometimes. There's a sense also that Arlene Foster, the leader, might not be there forever. Some people, I suspect, in that party are mindful of that and maybe on manoeuvres. So it was very telling when Arlene Foster actually spoke at Stormont in that sudden press conference. She didn't actually attack the form of words that's used in the agreement. So I think Number 10 will be hoping that they can piece this back together again.
Well, piecing back together, how the hell do they do it?
Well, they're pretty sure they can do it. Theresa May has signalled that she's ready to come back here on Wednesday. Jean-Claude Juncker was saying he very much expects this thing to be put back together again. They're working now, I'm sure, on contacts with the DUP, who were briefed about all this in advance, to try and smooth things over and try and balance things with them. It was very telling, though. I mean, when they do get back here, if they get back here, it's worth remembering what it is that we're moving on to. And that's the next phase, phase 2, discussing trade negotiations, discussing transition. It may make all of this look like a picnic. That Belgian Green MEP who played such a role in today's proceedings said, you haven't really had a negotiation yet. We were just handing you your instructions here, and you were taking them down. One other takeaway from today, I think some of these leaders were sounding a little bit as though they felt sympathy for Theresa May, bordering perhaps even on pity. They felt sorry for her. They didn't want to be in her position, and that's not a great position to start the next phase of talks, if that's where we're heading.
Gary Gibbon in Brussels. From Dublin now, Senator Neil Richmond, Brexit spokesman for Fine Gael, Ireland's ruling party. From the Central Lobby in the House of Commons, the SNP's Brexit spokesman, MP Stephen Gettins, and Conservative MP Nadeem Sahawi, a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Senator Richmond, do you sometimes think that perhaps you're really negotiating direct with the DUP and that, in fact, really Mrs May is simply a kind of rather like a tennis net?
No, we think all through this process, the European negotiating team, which represents all of Ireland's interests, has engaged very clearly with the British negotiating team led by David Davis. We've put these issues on the table months ago. We already missed one deadline in October, but we continue to negotiate in good faith with Theresa May, and we leave it to her to get everything in order on her side politically.
Well, can you just tell me whether you see a difference between continued regulatory alignment and the customs union? What is the difference?
Well, there's a big difference staying within a customs union and making sure that the rules are, put in such a way that they make sure that everything continues in as easy a possible way for the island of Ireland, and that we make sure that we have no need to return to any customs apparatus which ultimately would threaten the peace and would threaten the Good Friday Agreement, which is the number 1 objective of the Irish government, is to maintain the integrity of the Good Friday Agreement. So it's a form of words and a situation with which you're perfectly at peace. It's a very detailed form of words that's taken us months to come through, and let there be no mistake, Ireland has compromised greatly on this. We didn't ask for Brexit, we don't want Brexit, we believe it is absolutely going to be a negative process, whether it's soft or hard, and we've come a long way to get terms that were agreed just this morning by the European Commission negotiating team, by the United Kingdom government, and which was agreeable to our cabinet when they met this morning. We've come a long way. We've got about another week or so for the next deadline. We already missed one deadline in October, and we really hope that we can see progress on the British side in the next few days, and we wish Prime Minister May well. Well, please wait with us just for a few moments. Let me go across to Westminster and Nadeem Sahawi. Nadeem Sahawi, are you happy with this form of words, and do you see any difference between continued regulatory alignment and the single customs union?
Well, on the Foreign Affairs Committee, we are looking at this particular issue. So the actual position paper that the government put out talked about a customs partnership. And that is about, if you're going to be partners and you want to have as frictionless movement of goods across borders from the EU into the United Kingdom as a whole, you need some form of a partnership, and that does need some form of alignment of regulation so that you avoid having hard borders. So I think this is a good proposal. I think the Prime Minister is, got real momentum here, and hopefully by the end of this week or early next week we will move on to then the trade talks. So look, there's a lot of details here. Obviously there's a lot of politics involved and some posturing as well from different negotiating teams as such, but I think ultimately this is a positive move, and we will get there hopefully to move on then to the talks around trade, which will also be tough, and there'll be lots more posturing, but actually both sides have the goodwill, which is what we heard today from Mr. Juncker and Mr. Tusk, that there's goodwill there to deliver a good Brexit deal. And I think what is incumbent upon all of us in this place behind me is to get behind our sort of negotiating team and get a good deal.
You'll forgive me if I suggest that perhaps this feels as if the whole system is completely dependent on 10 people up there in Northern Ireland from the DUP. And I mean, if you weren't in coalition with them, you'd have been away and home and dry.
Well, look, of course, the relationship between Northern Ireland and Ireland is very important. We had colleagues actually from the Foreign Affairs Committee go to Ireland. It's equally important to Ireland that we make sure the border remains open, that we make sure that the peace agreement continues to deliver peace, and we make sure that trade is frictionless. So this isn't just about Northern Ireland's relationship, it's about the whole of the United Kingdom and its relationship with the EU. So
but
big
the Irish
challenges
compromised
ahead.
today, and the DUP didn't. I mean, where does the compromise begin and end?
Well, there are compromises on all sides. A good negotiation.
So the DUP have compromised today, have they?
Well, look, I don't speak for the DUP. All I'm saying to you is a good negotiation means both sides, whether the EU 27 or the UK, walk away feeling slightly uncomfortable and then make sure they do a deal. That for me is good, positive outcomes, i.e. this isn't a zero-sum game that they win, we lose, we win, they lose. So I think there's more to go. The Prime Minister said she's confident she's going to be back. Gary Gibbon, your reporter, said that actually things are moving forward in a positive way. This is all part of the challenge, and I think we'll get there in the end.
So I just wonder very briefly, Neil Richmond, do you see this as a perfectly adult negotiation, or do you think the British government's over a barrel to the DUP?
This has been a very difficult negotiation. It's been a very delayed negotiation. We made proposals back in the summertime on how we could get through this process. As I said, we missed one deadline in October. We're on course for the council meeting next week. We hope we can achieve it. We're continuing to negotiate in good faith, and ultimately Ireland will lose from Brexit regardless of what is agreed.
Stephen Gethins for the SNP. I'm just wondering, how serious is this demand that if this compromise is reached with the DUP, in other words, that language of continued regulatory alignment, you would demand the same for Scotland, and would you be prepared to pursue it through the courts if you didn't get it?
Well, look, of course we'd be going to pursue it. This isn't news to the UK government. You know, I mean, all this chaos, a coalition of chaos actually, that we were warned about during the general election, but now we've got between the Conservatives and the DUP, has a big impact on jobs and the economy. But our proposal shouldn't come as news to anybody. It's over a year since the Scottish Government produced Scotland's Place in Europe, which was a pan-UK compromise that would keep us in the single market, the customs union, overcoming the problems that we've got today, helping the Irish, who I think Senator Richmond's absolutely right, have gone a long way to try and compromise for something that Ireland never ever asked for, in fact something that Scotland never asked for. Now, we've been warned that a hard Brexit could cost up to 80,000 jobs in Scotland, and that's why we have a responsibility to do all we can to protect jobs in the economy in Scotland, but actually in doing so will be good for the rest of the UK as well.
So this is a red line. I mean, if this was granted to the border between North and Southern Ireland, you would say not getting it for Scotland would be a red line.
Well, we'd obviously be asking for it for Scotland, because what it tells us is, rather than there being any practical problem, that the UK government concedes that actually this is something that can happen. So there's only a political impediment to this happening, and that political impediment sits in Whitehall. It doesn't sit anywhere else, not in Dublin, not in Cardiff, not in Edinburgh. And we have sought throughout this to try and compromise. We've acknowledged that although Scotland voted to remain, we could compromise by Scotland being part of the single market. But instead of just speaking to one party in Northern Ireland and trying to ram things through with the DUP, the Conservatives really need to start talking to other devolved administrations in a serious way, as well as other parties in Parliament as well.
Right. Nadine Sahawi, are you confident that the British people, whose decision has been so sanctified by the referendum and regarded as such ever since, are you sure that they really understood this, that you know, that this tension between the bits of Britain, which could fall asunder if this is got wrong, was really at stake?
Well, I think the British people voted to come out of the EU institutions, and then it's incumbent on their representatives in this place to deliver on that vote. I always quote the Socialist Prime Minister of Italy, Matteo Renzi, a week after the referendum, saying we have to deliver a good outcome, otherwise democracy is meaningless to the peoples of Europe, not just the peoples of the United Kingdom. And I think it's right that we in this place, as I said, get behind our negotiating team, try and get a good deal, deal with all these issues like a customs partnership that we're going to need for the whole of the United Kingdom with the EU 27, and get to a place where we can hand on heart say to the British people that we've delivered Brexit. So that's
a quick
important.
Yes or no. Can you foresee any deal eventually that perhaps leaves the whole of Britain inside the customs union?
Well, we've put forward a customs partnership, so this is slightly different.
No,
We've come out of the
yes or
customs
no.
union.
Can you foresee such a thing?
I think at the moment the position is to come out of the customs union and the single market and to negotiate a free trade deal and a customs partnership.
Thank you
so
very
we
much.
have seamless trade.
Thank you, Nadim Sahawi. Thank you very much, Mr. Gethin, and thank you indeed, Senator, for your participation too.
For Theresa May, today was meant to be the day the Brexit negotiations finally moved ahead. But instead, after hours of mounting expectations and reports she'd made a key concession on the Irish border, the Prime Minister was forced to announce that there was still no agreement. At the centre of the latest hold-up, Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionist Party, whose last-minute intervention appears for now to have scuppered the deal and put even more pressure on Mrs May's Brexit strategy. Our political editor, Faisal Islam, reports now from Brussels.
The Prime Minister arrived in Brussels for a spot of lunch like no other, with hopes high of a deal of sorts after goodwill generated in recent weeks. She was here to get the deal she needs. These set-piece occasions need the compromise to be choreographed across London, Brussels and Dublin But did they forget Belfast, of all places? At first, mixed messages from the Euro MPs with whom Michel Barnier was trying to sell a deal. Some negativity from Guy Verhofstadt, but that was brinkmanship.
There is no deal. There is no agreement.
Nothing today? No prospect today?
No, I'm optimistic that it is possible, 50-50.
Philippe Lambert was also in the room and revealed all about the deal on Ireland, live on Sky News.
Basically, the British government would commit to maintain the full alignment of legislation where pertinent, of course. So single market and customs union legislation that might potentially create a border will remain fully aligned, so there's none. That's basically...
That sounds an awful lot like staying in the customs union or single market.
It may sound like it, at least for Northern Ireland, but then again, that's the only solution if you want to keep the Good Friday Agreement, period.
At the same time, 500 miles away in Dublin, Irish leader Leo Varadkar fighting fit on the way to a special cabinet meeting to approve the Stage 1 deal, and was delighted with what seemed acceptance of coordination on regulation across the whole island post-Brexit. But 100 miles north in Belfast, the DUP taking fright at the idea of ongoing Northern Ireland regulatory alignment effectively with the single market and customs union.
Northern Ireland must leave the European Union on the same terms as the rest of the United Kingdom, and we will not accept any form of regulatory divergence which separates Northern Ireland economically or politically from the rest of the UK.
Back in Brussels, the talks were paused, the Prime Minister making a call to Belfast to try to assuage the concerns of the leader of a party that kept her in Downing Street. And when she came back, the deal was off.
Despite our best efforts and the significant progress we and our teams have made over the past days on the three main withdrawal issues, it was not possible to reach a complete agreement today.
On many of the issues, there is a common understanding, but it's clear, crucially, that we want to move forward together. But on a couple of issues, some differences do remain, which require further negotiation.
And she was a little late to meet the European Council President, Donald Tusk. Has the DUP derailed the deal, Prime Minister? No answer from the Prime Minister, but no deal as well. And it isn't just about today. There's a fundamental question as to whether a deal can be done that both pleases the Irish government and her DUP colleagues. As she entered, the Prime Minister walked straight past the waiting German Finance Minister, Peter Altmaier, close confidant of Chancellor Merkel. He sounding rather unimpressed.
This is a very difficult issue, and we have a number of open points still on the agenda. They have to be clarified, but this will happen in confidential and in intensive talks.
Is it a no or a not yet, Prime Minister? One thing is clear, this was never going to be easy. All sides confident that a solution can be found, but they said that this morning too. Faisal Islam, Sky News in Brussels.
Well, the Irish government began the day in positive mood, suggesting that the deal was done and that the Irish border would look very much like it does today post-Brexit. But by this evening, there was frustration in Dublin that the seemingly intractable problem of the Irish border was still unresolved. From Dublin, Darren McCaffrey reports.
Almost 100 years old, over 300 miles long, and with 275 crossings, this virtually invisible Irish border has become the dividing line in these Brexit talks. That was until today, when the Irish government thought it agreed a deal, only for it to fall apart over lunch.
The Irish negotiating team received confirmation from the British government and the Barnier task force that the United Kingdom had agreed a text on the border that met our concerns. I was then contacted by the President of the European Commission, President Juncker, and the President of the European Council, President Tusk, and I confirmed to them both Ireland's agreement to that text. I am surprised and disappointed that the British government now appears not to be in a position to conclude what was agreed earlier today.
Ministers here are more than just disappointed, they're frustrated. Frustrated that after weeks, months of intensive negotiations, the UK government has failed to ensure the support of the DUP. Dublin now claim that it will not go back on the agreed form of text that was agreed today. And that puts Theresa May in an incredibly difficult position, trying to maintain the support she has for the deal here, but a deal that was rejected in Belfast. And the DUP have firmly laid the blame with the Irish government.
Stop giving in to a bunch of cynical players in the Irish Republic who are playing fast and loose with this issue. They know there's a solution. They've refused to accept, even to discuss that solution, because they prefer to make sure that they keep Sinn Féin off their backs.
I would suggest to Sammy, our friend, with the greatest of respect to him, that he take a deep breath and just reflect a little longer and a little harder and wake up, smell the coffee and realise that we either act together or we will walk our communities, including our unionist brothers and sisters that we share this island with, into very deep economic and political difficulties.
Today was meant to be a deadline day for a deal in principle that was meant to agree to no hard border. But it is unionist fears about attempts to undermine that very border which has stalled Brexit, ensuring this long-running political divide in Ireland continues to separate both sides. Darren McCaffrey, Sky News, Dublin.
Well, our political editor Faisal Islam is in Brussels. Faisal, how did this take people by surprise, and how is there really any prospect of a deal now?
No doubt it's been a chaotic day. This should have been the day where a path to sufficient progress was absolutely nailed down. The Prime Minister returning triumphantly, facing a long debate on Europe tomorrow in the Commons in front of her MPs. That's been pulled, I understand. And they really should have seen this coming as regards the DUP. Sky News reporting last week the key concerns of the top of the DUP at the idea of some sort of regulatory divergence being allowed for Northern Ireland from a post-Brexit UK. And then what appeared to happen was that there was a sort of general leak of the draft text, the joint statement between the UK and the EU. And the hope, I think, was that diplomats had been clever enough to come up with a bit of a fudge that meant Ireland had climbed down a bit. No longer no regulatory divergence, instead a kind of regulatory alignment, and that would be enough for the DUP. But no, and we have quite a pickle now because the fudge is out there in the open. So how do you go back now and say that this is something that can be all things to all parties here? It seems quite difficult to see Ireland backing down now. It seems quite difficult for the DUP as well. Some sort of compromise surely should be possible. Government keen to paint this as some sort of just temporary bump along the road, a hurdle. But here is the big issue. Perhaps there is just something more fundamental about the Irish aspect to this Brexit situation. Perhaps some of the solutions to this issue are just not possible. And that is the fundamental issue, and the issue that we're facing as these negotiations over Brexit move from the narrative, move from the great stories of how great things are going to be or how doom-mongery they're going to be, into the reality of lots of interested parties wondering how they're going to sort this out legally, politically and diplomatically. And you know what? The evidence today is a lot harder than people thought.
Faisal, live there in Brussels. Thank you.
It is perhaps the most difficult of all conundrums to resolve. How do you preserve the illusion that the island of Ireland is more or less one country when it is, in fact, two? Fly into Dublin today, drive to Belfast, look around and drive back again, and bar the sight of the odd union flag, you wouldn't see the join. That's the way the Irish want to keep it, and many unionists too. But Brexit means the UK might now go one way while the EU goes another. So how do you mark the border if the economic and political systems start to diverge? Today, Theresa May believed she had an answer. She flew to Brussels with a plan. But the trouble was, no one seemed to have discussed the detail with her parliamentary allies, Northern Ireland's Democratic Unionists, and, as they have before, they said no. Our Europe editor James Mates tracked another extraordinary day.
It had all been arranged. Mrs May was coming to Brussels bearing yet another significant British concession. There'd be no hard border in Ireland. Rules in the north would be allowed to diverge from the rest of Britain, but not from the EU post-Brexit. London, Dublin and Brussels were all on board, but as she headed into lunch with Commission President Juncker, it suddenly appeared Belfast was not. Far from it. Not for the first time in history, a Democratic Unionist leader declared that Ulster says no.
We have been very clear. Northern Ireland must leave the European Union on the same terms as the rest of the United Kingdom, and we will not accept any form of regulatory divergence which separates Northern Ireland economically or politically from the rest of the UK. And the economic and constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom must not be compromised.
Cue an interrupted lunch, frantic phone calls to Belfast, and ultimately a joint appearance in which, rather than the triumphant announcement both sides had been hoping for, just a recognition they must now try again.
It was not possible to reach a complete agreement today. I'm still confident that we can reach sufficient progress before the European Council of the 15th of December. This is not a failure. This is the start of the very last round. I'm very confident that we'll reach an agreement in the course of this week.
On a couple of issues, some differences do remain, which require further negotiation and consultation, and those will continue, but we will reconvene before the end of the week.
If the plan is to go back to Dublin and ask the Irish government to soften its position, well, that doesn't look hopeful.
I accept that the Prime Minister has asked for more time, and I know that she faces many challenges, and I acknowledge that she is negotiating in good faith. But my position and that of the Irish government is unequivocal, and it's supported by all of the parties in Dáil Éireann, and I believe the majority of people on these islands.
But in Brussels, leading Irish voices still believe that this political chasm can be crossed.
It's really important that the British government have genuinely moved, which they have, that the European Union understand the importance, as they have from day one of this process, and that we are on the verge of a settlement today, which will allow us all to get on to phase two.
This evening, Mrs May met the man who had said today was the final deadline, Council President Donald Tusk. But deadlines have a habit of being extended, and time probably now won't run out until the end of the week. That is just a few days to find a middle ground between two essentially incompatible positions. James Mates, News at 10, Brussels.
Well, given what James was saying there, where on earth does Mrs May go from here? As we heard, she says a couple of issues still need to be sorted out. That's one way of putting it. Meanwhile, she will have ringing in her ears warnings today from political leaders in Scotland and Wales, plus the Mayor of London, for good measure, that if Northern Ireland gets a special deal, then they want one too.
It was not the homecoming Theresa May expected. Back in Downing Street, empty-handed tonight, the door shut on one potential deal, and more late nights ahead in the hunt for an even more creative solution. So where does she turn now? A less united kingdom was not supposed to be part of the fallout of Brexit. In Edinburgh, the reaction to the news that Northern Ireland would keep very similar regulations to those it has now was to say, us too.
If they agree to a special set of arrangements for Northern Ireland, then they demonstrate that these things are practically possible, and it will be very difficult to argue that there should be special arrangements for one part of the UK but not for other parts of the UK that also want them.
And then there's London, with the Bank of England suggesting up to 75,000 city jobs are at risk through Brexit. The Mayor would also like a bespoke deal for the capital.
I'm saying the government should give the entire country membership of the single market, membership of the customs union, and the cast-iron guarantee to EU citizens. If it is the case, and it appears it is, the government's accepted the principle that part of the country can have that arrangement, that I think that should include London as well as Northern Ireland.
The Prime Minister's expected statement to the Commons tomorrow has been cancelled, and this afternoon backbenchers were briefed on progress or the lack of it. Remainers amongst them had a solution to break the impasse.
Call it simple, but if we stayed in the single market and if we stayed in the customs union, you could still get your Brexit, but you would give the certainty both in Northern Ireland and right across our country, put the economy at the heart of it all.
But that's a red line for the Prime Minister and an anathema to many Brexiteers.
I would be sceptical of a fresh arrangement with the European Union which committed us to alignment with their regulatory rules and regulations, indefinitely into the future. I think that would be difficult to reconcile with regaining control over making our laws.
So the Prime Minister is caught up in a tangle of her own red lines and those of the DUP. Something will have to give to square the circle, and whisper it, the trade negotiations are expected to be even tougher. Romilly Weeks, News at 10.
And we have correspondents on both sides of the Irish border tonight. Let's join Juliet Bremner first in Dublin, and then Mark Mallet, who's in Belfast. Juliet, I mean, it didn't sound like there was, but is there any room for manoeuvre in the Irish government's position, do you think?
I think the real question is, why would they feel the need to move? As far as they're concerned, this isn't some quick deal that they drew up on the back of a fag packet, as we used to say. This is something that's had weeks and weeks of hard graft go into it. And it was not surprising that Leo Varadkar, the Prime Minister of Taoiseach, sounded a little frustrated that having got this very precise form of words, they substituted non-divergence for alignment at the last minute this morning, that Mrs May couldn't sign that off, couldn't sell it in the end. I think they know that there are people taunting them about not sort of making better progress. We had a DUP politician who said they were nothing but a bunch of political chancers. They say they don't want to get in a political row, that they have no interest in Britain not getting a deal. But they also say that they have to stick to this red line. They want to make sure that there's no return to any kind of hard border. They thought they got that, Tom. They thought that they had a form of words that would allow that to happen. Well, that's being kicked into touch, and I think they now believe it's Britain's job to sort it out.
OK, Juliet, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's just put some of that to Mark. I mean, Mark, one would really have expected the Prime Minister to have signed off the DUP before she went in today. What do you think happened?
Yeah, well, Tom, it would seem pretty inconceivable that the Prime Minister would have set off for Brussels without dropping a text or an email to the DUP to say, here, we're going to do this deal, it's going to be OK. It would also seem pretty inconceivable that she would set off for Brussels to reach an agreement and then deal with the fallout afterwards, given that it is the DUP MPs who are propping up her government and keeping her in number 10. But whatever happened, the choreography all went completely out of sync, and that led to Arlene Foster reacting to that speculation this morning, reiterating her party stance. No political divergence, and reminding all concerned that the DUP are key players in all of this.
Well, I don't know if you heard what Juliet was just saying there about the unlikelihood or lack of likelihood of the Irish changing their position. I mean, that really only leaves the DUP. Are they going to shift?
Well, they are tough and experienced negotiators, but in the Northern Ireland context, where deadlines come and deadlines go, timing is of the essence here, and someone will have to blink first if they are to try and square this Brexit circle. The DUP have not changed their stance in any way during these Brexit negotiations. So where we are tonight, and given today's events, I would say it's highly unlikely that it will be the DUP who will move anytime soon.
OK, Mark in Belfast, thank you very much. Well, let's move on now to talk to James Mates in Brussels. James, another remarkable day in this process. The EU, in the form of Donald Tusk and Mr Juncker, were sounding pretty positive after it all. Is that realistic? Is there a chance of a breakthrough in your view?
Well, I mean, the optimism is based on the fact that the British government has already moved so far to get this deal that they really can't quite believe it's going to fall down on this, particularly as this morning it was down in draft form. The wording had been altered and finessed. This lunch was just supposed to be a tying up of loose ends and then a political signing off on the whole thing. And then suddenly, right in the middle of the meal, Mrs May's off having to make a phone call and come back and say, look, it's simply not going to happen now. We're going to have more time. And, you know, I mean, watching this whole thing with considerable bemusement as, you know, during the day they hear the leaders of Scotland, of Wales, of London, the Mayor of London even saying, what Northern Ireland's been offered, we want it. At the same time as the Northern Irish are saying, what we've been offered, we absolutely don't want it. And then you've got London saying, well, you who want it, you can't have it. You who don't want it, you must have it. the British government, as they see it, is still negotiating amongst itself. It still can't decide what it wants. And they really don't believe that augurs particularly well for the trade talks, even if they get going in January.
OK, James, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's come to our political editor, Robert Peston, here to make sense of this. Now, look, you and I have lived through a few days like this, as James has there, and he was just talking about it. I mean, what do you make of it? Did she go not having squared off the unionists? What do you think actually happened?
Yeah, she absolutely went without showing her the wording of the offer that she was going to put. I mean, my own view about this is, in a way, this reinforces what Jeremy Hunt said to me at the weekend, which is there's a choice between Theresa May's approach to Brexit or no Brexit at all. And I'd quite like to take you through the argument there, as it were. I'm not sure if she ever really in her heart believed, actually, that she would be able to get the DUP on board for this regulatory alignment that only applies to Northern Ireland, because that is to reintroduce the border in the middle of the sea. The DUP have made it clear to me, and they've therefore also made it clear to her, that there is one thing that they fear more than a Jeremy Corbyn-led government, and that is the introduction of a border. So they would bring her down if that were to happen. Now, in that sense, what they have said today is quite useful to her when she goes into Cabinet tomorrow, because there is an alternative plan to get through this mess, which is for this regulatory alignment not to apply just to Northern Ireland, but to apply to the whole of the UK. And so what she will say to the Cabinet tomorrow, and in particular to Michael Gove and Boris Johnson, who do not want regulatory alignment between the whole of the UK and the rest of the EU, because they will say that is not bringing back control. They will say, well, you've got a choice, chaps. You know, if you do not back me here, what we will get is a hard Brexit, because we won't get a trade deal. And she'll also say, and by the way, the House of Parliament will not vote for a hard Brexit, and what we'll therefore get is another referendum, and you won't get Brexit at all. So they are being confronted with their worst nightmare, in essence, which is to support the kind of Brexit they don't like, or have no Brexit at all.
Put like that, it's going to be quite a few days, Robert. We will see, I think, is what we can conclude from that. OK, well, thank you very much indeed.
Jean-Claude Juncker wore his Anglophile Burberry tie today, a hint the more eagle-eyed amongst us took to be a sure sign a deal with Britain was imminent. In the end, was not to be. What looked, sounded and felt like a potential Brexit solution to the Irish border was put on pause in the briefest of press conferences around 4 o'clock this afternoon. The sticking point then, what the DUP, who prop up Theresa May's Conservatives, suggested was sloppy language on the part of the Irish government. Now, from what we understand, Ireland had been expecting to sign off a statement that promised a continued regulatory framework north of the border after Britain leaves the EU. But following those stern words from DUP leader Arlene Foster, the PM appeared to backtrack, perhaps fearing she'd misjudged the moment. The deal's far from dead, but it needs more time and perhaps, who knows, new concessions to the DUP for their support. Let's go to Nick Watt for his take on the day. Nick.
Well, the Prime Minister had gone into these talks today with Downing Street describing them as a staging post on the way to the European Council next week. But Theresa May had hoped to get a deal today and indeed had pencilled in a statement to Parliament tomorrow. But it didn't happen because the DUP took fright at reports from Dublin in the Brexit deal there would be a declaration that there would be no regulatory divergence between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. So what is actually in that deal? Well, I understand from the UK side that the deal on Northern Ireland covers 3 scenarios from good to bad. The good scenario, there is an overall free trade agreement between the UK and the EU at the end of this process, and you get a frictionless border automatically from that very good deal. Scenario number 2 is if that doesn't happen, then there would be a bespoke arrangement for Northern Ireland. In the worst case scenario, which the UK government doesn't think will happen, what you would then have, if you fail to do that, is you'd have a declaration that there would be full alignment of those elements that are currently there, cross-border cooperation, from the Good Friday Agreement. So that is transport, the single electricity market and agriculture. And then the document says, how do you achieve that? And it has two ideas. One is you have harmonisation of regulation, and the other one is you have regulatory equivalence. The UK would want it to be regulatory equivalence because the UK would decide these are the regulations and we'll say they're equivalent of the EU. The EU would want harmonisation because we would just agree with them. So look, I've been taking a look at how this row broke out today. Love wasn't quite in the air, but a deal appeared to be in sight. Theresa May pitched up in Brussels for lunch, and over the road, Donald Tusk dared to joke about how much he likes Mondays. All seemed fine until the lunch ran over schedule and then broke up without agreement. When Theresa May and Jean-Claude Juncker finally spoke, it was all over rather quickly.
Ladies and gentlemen, it was not possible to reach a complete agreement today.
He spoke for less than 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jean-Claude. But on a couple of issues, some differences do remain, which require further negotiation.
She spoke for just 40 seconds. Hopes of a breakthrough today fell apart over Northern Ireland. The Irish Prime Minister, who'd been planning to hail a deal just after lunch, kept his head down for 3 hours. And then this.
Following the government meeting this morning, the Irish negotiating team received confirmation from the British government and the Barnier Task Force that the United Kingdom had agreed a text on the border that met our concerns. This text would form part of the broader EU-UK agreement on Phase 1 and would allow us all to move on to Phase 2. I was then contacted by the President of the European Commission, President Juncker, and the President of the European Council, President Tusk, and I confirmed to them both Ireland's agreement to that text. I am surprised and disappointed that the British government now appears not to be in a position to conclude what was agreed earlier today.
The deal ran into trouble after reports that one draft stated that there would be no divergence in EU rules across the Irish border which support the Good Friday Agreement. This was clarified, but the DUP were furious at what they saw as an attempt to prise Northern Ireland away from the rest of the UK.
We have been very clear. Northern Ireland must leave the European Union on the same terms as the rest of the United Kingdom, and we will not accept any form of regulatory divergence which separates Northern Ireland economically or politically from the rest of the UK, and the economic and constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom must not be compromised in any way.
There's frustration in Downing Street, where there's a feeling that Brussels and Dublin overhyped the proposed deal. This has, if only temporarily, torpedoed Theresa May's efforts to inch forward the Brexit negotiations with the support of the DUP. So we can expect the Prime Minister to embark on a charm offensive to reassure the DUP that her plans are far more modest. At their heart, this will involve embedding in the final Brexit deal those elements of cross-border cooperation emanating from the Good Friday Agreement. At the moment, unionists in Northern Ireland are nervous.
Well, I think that it has made things much more difficult, what's happened today. If there had been an agreed form of wording with the DUP beforehand, it might even have been possible to present it as a DUP or a joint DUP Conservative proposal. So I think it's going to be very difficult now.
In London and Dublin, there is hope that a deal will soon be reached.
I think today has been successful. We understand that later this week there is every prospect of a deal, so satisfying the European Union that in its words sufficient progress has been made, which will set us up for a favourable conclusion to the summit on the 15th of December. That's what I think we're working towards, and the mood here at Westminster at the moment is far more upbeat than I've known it for some considerable time now. So I think with compromise on both sides, because that's the nature of any negotiation, we are set fair for some good news before Christmas.
We have negotiated, as I said, in absolute good faith with the entire British negotiating team. David Davis and Michel Barnier will meet again this week. Theresa May and Jean-Claude Juncker had a good, positive meeting today, and we're hopeful that the Prime Minister will be able to get this agreement over the line with the DUP and other factors in time for the Council meeting in December. We wish her every bit of luck, and we really hope we can get this resolved as soon as possible. We desperately want to move on to phase 2 of the negotiation process.
Today, the hands of history didn't quite meet. All parties in the Brexit talks will be hoping we won't have to wait too long for that handshake.
How long then, Nick? Let's pick up. We heard Andrew Murison saying he thought it would still happen next week or before the summit. What's your sense?
Well, the UK government has always believed unofficially that this Friday is the deadline to get an agreement, because after that it's very difficult to make substantial changes to a European Council draft summit conclusion. So the Prime Minister will be talking to the DUP leader, and she will be talking to and possibly actually going to Brussels to meet again this week with Jean-Claude Juncker and Donald Tusk. I was talking to one member of the Cabinet who said, look, fundamentally we are in agreement with Dublin on this, but this person said there is a bit of a dance. We're a minority government and so are they. There are audiences to talk to, but the DUP are really, really upset. I spoke to one senior DUP figure at the heart of all this, and this person said to me, we in Northern Ireland cannot have a border with GB. It's our biggest market. We are not stupid. And then I said to this person, is Theresa May listening to you? And this person said, oh yes, she has no choice.
Nick, thanks very much. So when and how did it all unravel? Earlier I asked Ireland's Agriculture Minister Michael Creed what he had made of the day's events.
Well, I suppose in essence we thought we had a deal in the early afternoon, and it turns out that we didn't, and that's obviously somewhat disappointing. But look, I suppose given the commitment of both sides to further engagement, and given the fact that we have a deadline of the December Council on the 14th and 15th of December, and given the fact that I think everybody, Irish government included, wants us to be in a position to move to phase 2, I certainly think that with goodwill on all sides that can be achieved, but I don't want to underestimate the significance of the issues that have yet to be agreed.
What do you think actually went wrong today?
Well, I think in essence that's probably a question that would be best directed to Prime Minister May, because we felt, as I indicated, that we had the broad outline of an agreement earlier and that sufficient progress could be reported by the European Task Force to the heads of state. It's obvious that the DUP have issues with regard to the Island of Ireland issues. We have particular issues that we have put to the forefront since day one, and that has been about ensuring that the UK leaving the European Union doesn't give rise to a hard border on the island of Ireland.
So
I think the lessons of...
Just to understand that, was your understanding this morning that the DUP had been signed up to it? Because obviously they were always going to have misgivings about this. So was your understanding that they were signed up and then they changed their minds, or that they'd never been signed up and she was going to go ahead with it anyway?
Well, look, I mean, the negotiations are conducted primarily by the European Task Force and Michel Barnier at the helm there, and the UK government. Over the weekend, yes, the Irish government was heavily involved in the detail on the issues to do with the island of Ireland, and in particular our insistence that in the context of phase 1 of these negotiations that we get in writing a commitment that there would not be a hard border re-emerging.
The DUP are critical to power sharing in Northern Ireland. Wasn't it a mistake to overlook how essential to these talks they were?
Well, I mean, the DUP are but one voice in Northern Ireland which regrettably doesn't have a power sharing executive in place at the moment. They are a critical voice in the context of the parliamentary arithmetic in Westminster. We're not a party to that. We negotiate in the European Union with the British government and with Prime Minister May. You know, it's not incumbent on the Irish government to engage directly, but we are, of course, open and willing to engage with the DUP. In fact, I personally believe that our concerns, when they're boiled down to it, are concerns that are broadly shared by the vast majority of people in Northern Ireland.
Newsnight understands this evening that 3 possible scenarios were on the table for this deal, which may still go ahead. either an all-UK deal, free trade with the EU, which would look and sound, I guess, like a soft Brexit or a customs union, or a bespoke deal for Northern Ireland, or some kind of deal which would just look at areas of cross-border cooperation. Is that what you understand this deal was about, the cross-border cooperation?
Well, as I understand it, the deal was about ensuring, in terms of regulatory alignment, that we did not have the necessity for a border between Newry and Dundalk, between Derry and Donegal, and you know, whatever means we employ to achieve that, regulatory alignment, remaining in the customs union and the single market, whatever political invention is required to come up with a solution that delivers on that, you know, is you know, not something we're excessively prescriptive about.
Minister, let me just
we do know what it is we want.
Well, let me try and pin you down on that, because that seems to be where the language is getting confused, because the Northern Ireland Agreement, as things stand, only mentions, doesn't it, agriculture, energy and transport. Are you wanting to see every regulation across every sector covered by the same EU deal in the north and south? Is that where you're heading? In other words, is it convergence rather than just alignment of what you have?
Well, I think the terminology that was being used was regulatory alignment. And it's important to bear in mind that this isn't, in many respects, breaking new ground. We have alignment on an all-island basis at the moment on issues that there isn't alignment between Ireland, for example, and the rest of the United Kingdom. For example, in the area of animal health, we have it. In the area of food safety, we have it. So this isn't you know, revolutionary in its concept.
But what I'm
all.
asking is, are you looking for convergence on all the other areas as well, all the other sectors, or would you be happy just to stick with those three that's specifically mentioned in the Northern Ireland Agreement?
No, what we want is a situation where we achieve in these outcomes a situation where there isn't a border emerging. We are preoccupied by that, not for trade reasons, but for political reasons. We do not want an emergence of a border again, and all of the historical issues that are associated with a border, for good reasons, and these lessons aren't lost on any section of the community in Northern Ireland or in the Republic of Ireland, and indeed in the broader United Kingdom they're not lost on, because we've paid an excessively heavy price. We were satisfied with what we had today in the context of a regulatory alignment, you know, that would deliver on that.
Michael Creed, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Emily.
Agriculture Minister Michael Creed. Forgive us, we wrongly labelled Arlene Foster as First Minister. She is, of course, the DUP leader. Let's pick up with our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, who's there. There is a theory, Mark, that there is a real game plan to what Theresa May is doing, and apart from today, there is something in place here.
Well, if you take today's language and misunderstandings out of the picture and look at those three options you were discussing there with the Minister or with Nick earlier, complete convergence, a partial deal for Northern Ireland, or Justice Guarantee that proved so controversial today, all of them would create some kind of border in the Irish Sea if Northern Ireland were taken in to be on the same regime in a limited or bigger way with Ireland. And of course we know that that is totally unacceptable to the DUP. And actually, being in Dublin last week and talking to a lot of people, it's pretty unacceptable to the business community in Ireland too, that doesn't want impediment to trade across the Irish Sea. And I think that gives us a clue that the softer form of Brexit is in sight for the government here. We've seen all sorts of other clues, whether it's abandoning the no-deal Brexit language, the transition period, accepting the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice during the transition period, the canon of EU law, all of that stuff. It all trends in that direction. And I think we've got a fascinating glimpse through the prism of Ireland at this possibility that there is a plan, and it's for a pretty soft form of Brexit.
What would that look like? I mean, we've got examples of what soft Brexit have looked like, and they've been rejected, whether it's, you know, Norway model or the Canada model or whatever?
Look, for Theresa May, she's obviously wanted to slalom around the critics on all sides, and that's why she's, we remember Brexit means Brexit, red, white and blue Brexit. She's always tried to define it in her own terms, because she knows as soon as she says, yes, we'd like something like Norway, it would become impossible for her. People would coalesce. And even in the Florence speech, she voiced this idea that no, we don't want Norway, we don't want Canada, we must be able to do better than just this binary option. And of course, that's what they hope. Now, some people say it's unrealistic, it's cakeist, it's trying to have your cake and eat it, you can't get this special deal, but it's quite possible that the UK will get a bespoke package that, in her terms, gets, as she said, she wants the closest possible relationship. And so that means going pretty near to convergence on customs and regulatory terms, but carving out British exceptions.
Well, thanks very much.
So, top stories then. Perhaps anyone involved with number 10 should look away now. The Brexit negotiations quite clearly dominating tomorrow's newspapers. The Telegraph reports that Theresa May's attempts to seal a deal with Brussels fell apart after the DUP refused to back the government's strategy for the Irish border. The Financial Times says the Prime Minister was forced to back away from a potential agreement at the very last minute after the DUP's objections. The Metro says Arlene Foster was furious with the idea of Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK having different relationships with the EU after Brexit. The Eye says Scotland, Wales and London now will want their own bespoke deals after Britain in effect agreed on a bespoke deal for Northern Ireland. The Daily Mirror accuses the DUP of derailing Brexit, forcing the Prime Minister to backtrack. The Guardian says Theresa May's failure to secure a deal has exposed her weaknesses, the DUP wrecking the Brexit deal, as you can see there. While in the Times, there's a warning from Brussels officials who say that time is running out for Mrs May to strike a deal. The Express, meanwhile, leading on a different story. They're warning that freezing temperatures are on the way, with snow and gales expected to hit the country this week. The Star also has that story, saying we're in for a 4-week Arctic blast. And The Sun has a story on Meghan Markle, my rift with Dad. So let's talk more then. Andrew Pearce, Kevin Maguire are here. This does not make great reading for Theresa May, does it? And there's number 10.
There is no way to put any gloss on this. This is not good, because it seemed the spin, the briefings, was that an agreement had been made. The Irish Prime Minister at the Taoiseach thought he'd done a deal with Europe and with Britain. And I assumed, I think most people assumed, that the DUP, the coalition partners, after all, of the government, had been talked to, informed, yeah, all of that. And I even wondered, I wonder if they had to give them anything else to get their agreement. And then there was that remarkable conversation between Arlene Foster and her acolytes when she talked to the cameras. She wouldn't take any questions. I thought, is she torpedoing it? But I couldn't quite work it out, because the wording was so carefully phrased. I thought, can they still keep this on board? And I suspect they probably can get it back on board, but you have to say, what was the Northern Ireland Secretary doing, James Brokenshire? Why wasn't this squared before Mrs May arrived in Brussels?
So what is the explanation for that? Perhaps it had been squared with Arlene Foster, she couldn't bring her party with her. I mean, what could possibly have happened?
She is a woman who's in a lot of political difficulty. There's an investigation underway into some, what is it? Well, they call it cash for ash.
Cash for ash.
An home insulation scheme which went horribly wrong, cost hundreds of millions of pounds.
Energy generation.
Yeah, and she could be forced out. So she is fighting her own political battle here. And by going out on a limb.
She's getting the blame, isn't she? Let's just take a quick look. The Metro, they're taking the DUP, your paper, Kevin, DUP.
Good headline.
Duped, in other words. You like that one, do you?
Yeah, I like that.
So they're clearly getting the blame for this.
They are, although the Brextremists in the government, your Jacob Rees-Moggs, your John Redwoods, your Bill Cashers, are probably siding with the DUP on this.
Or
Conservative and Unionist Party,
Union, maybe,
which makes Theresa May's position even harder. It's utter humiliation for her, because never has that phrase, in office but not in power, been truer. We need a strong leader to negotiate Brexit with 27 other countries, relatively weak hand. You've got to play it well. She thinks she's squared off the third of those 3 issues. You've got citizens' rights, increase the divorce bill. But Boris Johnson's no longer going to go whistle. He's agreed 50 billion or whatever it is. But Ireland is a big issue. You've got a 310-mile land border. How do you deal with that? It's always been difficult. Often it's dealt with, as Bertie Ahern, the former Taoiseach, said, you look the other way. But the DUP have scuppered it now. Either number 10, and David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, and James Brokenshire, the Northern Ireland Secretary, haven't squared off and got on side the 10 DUP MPs who May requires. In the Bung Parliament, she had to give them £1 billion to keep her job. Damien Green, who's her deputy, he's supposed to be liaising with the DUP. He went to their conference recently in Belfast. He's otherwise engaged with the one-handed typing allegations and what was found on his computer screen, and the allegation from Kate Maltby, the woman who claims he may have or may not have made an inappropriate pass to her. Gavin Williamson, the chief whip, who negotiated the arrangement with the DUP, is now the defence secretary, fighting these bogus war against cuts. The point is, nobody is in control. That is it. But you need a powerful leader who knows what they're doing, who can speak with authority to the other 27. You square everybody, you have them all on side, you have your alliance, your coalition, and she hasn't done it. It is utter chaos.
No strong leader would find this any easier. The point being the DUP and those unionists in Northern Ireland want one thing and Ireland wants something else.
Do not offer to the 27, the people you're negotiating with, what you cannot deliver. Because if you do that, you will have no authority.
A strong leader could make that
whatsoever.
mistake as well, couldn't he?
Yeah, but I suspect, Anna, I suspect, clearly there was an element of surprise. She had to break off from her lunch with Juncker, probably a great relief.
Which takes me back to what happened then.
To ring Arlene Foster, although The Guardian is saying that Arlene Foster rang the Prime Minister. I thought it was the other way round, because she clearly was alerted by this press conference, and it took her by surprise. I think she thought the deal was done with the DUP. So did the DUP change their mind? I suspect they did.
Northern Ireland politics is like no politics elsewhere in the United Kingdom. Very different to Scotland, Wales, any part of England. Once the Republic of Ireland wants a deal and is pushing, the DUP almost automatically recoils and doesn't want it. But let's not forget, Northern Ireland voted to remain. The DUP, which was for out, lost the referendum within its own territory, within those 6 counties, within Northern Ireland, that bit of Ulster. But you read all the papers and you can see even the Brexit papers, the Daily Telegraph, a huge cheerleader for Brexit. Its coverage is directed by somebody who used to be in the Leave campaign. Their chaos ends in chaos.
And look, and you can see Peter Foster, who was one of the first with that we think the Brexit divorce bill, which he put anywhere between 45 and 55 billion.
He's done well.
He's done well. He said the plan was airborne and then nosedived. So I suspect, who knows, that there wasn't a tacit agreement of some sort with the DUP. They changed their mind.
We know the Taoiseach was talking about regulatory alignment between Northern Ireland and the Republic. Could it be possible that if we actually had, alongside these talks, our trade talks, we might have had regulatory alignment, and actually this problem would not be the problem it is today?
Very possibly, although David Davis, who said he wouldn't allow the sequencing that we have, he had to give in. The 3 issues, including Ireland being covered and dealt with before we move on to trade talks. You're stuck with that now. You can't do anything. Because what the Unionists do not want is the effective border moving down the Irish Sea, which, if Northern Ireland is having regulatory alignment, is really in the customs union or the single market by another name. They'd be different to the rest of the UK. Although, of course, Scotland, and quite rightly say, there's going to be a special deal for Northern Ireland. Why can't we have one there?
Their border would be out of the EU and not in the EU. That's the difference.
Carwyn Jones is saying the same in Wales. In London, Sadiq Khan's jumped up.
Well, they'll all jump on the bandwagon, won't they?
But that's the difference, is they're not bordering an EU nation. That is different.
And Carwyn Jones and Sadiq Khan and Nicola Sturgeon all misrepresented what's happening. They were trying to say that Northern Ireland was staying in the single market and the customs union. It wasn't. That was not ever on the table today.
But also,
it never was.
Also, I do wonder in principle why, as well, that is an objection other than the Republic wants it, so the Unionists don't want it. when in Northern Ireland they want to reduce corporation tax to a lower level in the rest of the UK to be in line with the Republic.
Kevin,
for instance, you don't pay the bedroom tax in Northern Ireland. You don't have abortion laws the same. So Northern Ireland is in many ways very different on some things to the rest of the UK. So why couldn't it be on this too? Other than that, they don't want it and they want to give them
the DUP want to be treated. They want to be treated. Northern Ireland to be treated the same as the UK. They're a unionist party.
Not on everything.
That's quite right.
They don't want the same
but
abortion
on something
laws.
as fundamental as leaving the European Union, they want to be treated the same.
No, the point being, do they want to look more similar to the UK or more similar to Ireland?
Yeah.
And it's quite clear to them where they
the UK.
where they feel
and on
about
this
that.
occasion, they've chosen. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And how she talks, cajoles them around, I don't know, because coercion doesn't work. I suppose you could bung them another £1 billion.
Yeah, I spoke to Bernard Jenkin half an hour or so ago, who said...
You're a sceptic MP.
Well, obviously, this is all completely overblown. The trade between them is
minimal.
Is milk floats.
It is. It is minor. It is minor.
There is massive cross-border trade.
And
the Republic relies on it too. It's not just one side. It's not just Northern Ireland. The Republic has had in Dublin. They've done their reports.
But Ireland's trade
would lose a lot.
Ireland's trade with Britain is enormous. We are their biggest trading partner.
Yes.
So the Irish president, the Taoiseach, really has to get this sorted out, because the last thing he wants is this to collapse with no deal. Disaster for them.
Brexiteers are known to play down perhaps the difficulties, if I can put it politely, of Brexit. Do you see difficulties
I never
now?
noticed
Do
that.
someone like you see difficulties now?
This was always going to be thorny and complex, and I thought they'd resolved it. This was always going to be one of the most problematic issues, the Northern Ireland border.
I never heard you say any of this during that referendum campaign. It was all going to be so
I thought it could be resolved.
Liam Fox, the National Trade Secretary,
and of course, if she
ever.
hadn't lost her majority, it would have been solved.
OK, so just to get your crystal ball gazing going, will we get a deal?
Yeah.
And will we get it by
yes.
the 14th
a week Thursday,
of December?
isn't it?
Thursday,
yeah.
Will we?
Yeah.
And you?
I don't know. It looks hard. I mean, look, I was there at the Good Friday Agreement in '98, freezing me. Anyway, I was very cold. You would go late into the night.
No, thank you. Charming.
And you knew it was going to go. You knew it was going to go to the wire. Both communities in Northern Ireland are pretty expert at playing it hard. But it doesn't always mean you're going to get there. You did on the Good Friday Agreement. There's no certainty on this.
Huge compromises were made by even that old tyrant, Ian Paisley, and Jerry
He was on the outside.
Yeah, but in the end,
he was protesting
huge
outside.
compromises were made, and they will get there in the end.
He turned
they
later.
will get there in the end.
But Ian Paisley was against, as the DUP was against.
Came around in the end. Became
Agreement.
great mates with these terrible people.
OK, we'll have to wait and see. Obviously, very important European Council meeting next week, full coverage of that. DUP wrecking the Brexit deal is all over the front pages, isn't it? Is it their fault?
It is. Well, I think ultimately it's Theresa May's fault, who is the Prime Minister and the Chief Negotiator, and she hasn't cleared her lines with the DUP. She thought she had an understanding. It's broken down. So it's a very bad day for the Prime Minister. I think that's reflected right across all the newspapers, including those that are very in favour of Brexit, as well as Remainer papers like the Guardian. And it's how do you sort it? Because the DUP felt they were being separated from the rest of the UK and pushed closer to the Republic of Ireland, which Northern Ireland voted to remain, but the DUP is a Leaver party, and of course it's always first and foremost in its mind is it's part of the United. It wants to be part of the United Kingdom. And how does she get out of it? There's always wriggle room. There's always fuzzing you can do. But it's going to be tricky. And the wider, it's not just Brexit, the wider implication is these are the 10 MPs in the DUP who prop her up in Parliament. They keep her in power. She wouldn't be in Downing Street without them. If you get a rift on something like this, she's either going to have to give something else, or it's really serious.
That may be true, but their gripe is genuine, is it not? As unionists, they want more in common with Britain than they do with Ireland.
Yeah, you can see why from their point of view they do what they want. They feel the proposal, basically to stay on the same regulations. Really, you're in the customs union, the single market, informally, if not formally. They say that has been run by Dublin. That's what motivates them. Although, because we have devolution, you have power sharing, all is currently suspended. They have different abortion laws. They want to reduce corporation tax to a lower rate than in Great Britain. So it's like the Republic. There's lots of areas they're quite happy to be different on, but on this, they want to be the same.
Yeah, they say they want to be on the same Brexit terms as the rest of Great Britain. What is baffling, though, to me, is when Theresa May was talking to Jean-Claude Juncker, now look, it was deeply embarrassing because it was all being so well choreographed. First, David Davis arrived in Brussels, followed by the Prime Minister. She's having lunch with Juncker, never a pleasant affair, I would imagine, because I don't suppose he passes the bottle over too often. And then, abruptly, she has to call off lunch and telephone Arlene Foster from the DUP, although The Guardian suggests Arlene Foster, the DUP leader, telephoned Mrs May to try and get to the bottom of what's gone wrong, because clearly the Prime Minister thought the DUP were on side. Now, is that because her own intelligence let her down, or is it because the DUP changed their mind? I don't know.
Yeah, or she couldn't take her party with her.
Well, the problem is she's got the DUP.
She might have agreed it, and then actually when persuading...
That's what I mean. I mean, I think she thought she'd got Arlene Foster on side. And then, clearly, something goes wrong and Foster realises there's a problem. And remember, Arlene Foster's got a big problem here. She's under huge pressure domestically. She's under investigation over a botched...
cash for ash.
Yeah, they call it cash for ash, which could cost her job. So she's trying to be as strong and as tough as possible. So there's a lot of other things going on here. Remember, a few weeks ago, we thought the entire Irish government was going to collapse until the Deputy Prime Minister quit, forced out.
May's also got a problem with our own right-wing Brexit extremists, Jacob Rees-Mogg, John Redwood, quite a lot of swivel-eyed ones who will be with the DUP and against... Yes, they are. You see them all.
Reasonable people. John Redwood and Jacob Rees-Mogg are reasonable people, and they're very charming.
Have you taken up sit-down comedy?
No. They're very charming and very decent people, actually. Very honourable. And they fought a long and honourable battle to get us out of the European Union, but the likes of Redwood and Cash and the others have got us out of the EU. Hurrah!
Anyway, she has... Yeah, you have a problem as the chief negotiator. David Davis has been doing the heavy lifting.
Is he swivel-eyed?
She goes... no, he's actually one of the sane, sensible ones.
Glad to hear it.
She goes in and is negotiating. But they will think, who are we negotiating with now? Because you give a proposal, you're about to sign something, agree it, and then you can't deliver. That is serious. It's serious for her, it's serious for the UK, and the other 27. You can feel the balance of power for some time has been shifting their way. There's been a series of capitulations by Britain, sequencing of the negotiations.
Compromises, they're called, they're called compromises.
Given the money, instead of 350 million a week for the NHS, it's going to pay 40, 50 billion, possibly even higher, as a divorce payment. Johnson's signed up to that, Boris Johnson and the others, but that's a capitulation. Seems to be some capitulation on Ireland, but then she can't deliver. And where does it take you? Because, of course, remember, all this is just about preparing for the absolutely crucial trade talks in our future trading relationship with the free market we're in. We want to come out, somehow then get into other free markets, which is utterly crazy, and she's in trouble.
Yes, there's your paper. Duped EU deal.
Good headline.
Shambles. May gave unionists £1 billion for their sport. Now they derail Brexit. The Telegraph. May's push for a deal ends in chaos.
Interesting headline for the Telegraph, of course, which is a Brexit paper, to call it chaos. And that photograph speaks volumes. Look, Mrs May earlier was smiling and laughing when she was in Brussels. A few hours later, there's a picture of a Prime Minister under pressure.
Gordon Rayner.
It was still cordial, though, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. And Jean-Claude Juncker was as nice as he's been about her ever.
But you know why that is?
He must have had a good lunch. I think he was swigging the bottle while she was on the phone to Mrs Foster.
He knows
that's what he was doing.
He knows he's got the upper hand.
Well, he's got
so therefore,
in the bank.
But hang on.
But you don't get it unless everything is agreed.
That's right. They only get the money if it's agreed, and only when the money is due. So it's not all going to go in one lump sum. So they're still going to have a cash flow problem.
So we're going to be paying for years. But Gordon Rayner, the political of the Telegraph, says May is under a lot of pressure to make a statement in the House of Commons tomorrow.
Well, she won't.
If she doesn't agree to, and she should do, just for democratic reasons. Remember the sovereignty of Parliament. You're supposed to be in favour of it. Don't
forget. I think she's confident she'll have a deal within 24 hours.
Bernard Jenkins said he thought this evening it would still go ahead, despite noises that it may.
But he might.
Maybe it will.
There might be lots of pushing, shoving,
the statement to the Commons tomorrow.
Right. But it might end up being an urgent question.
Even though the intel is it's not going to.
Because the Speaker believes in the sovereignty of Parliament, even if some Brexit extremists don't. But then you can't dictate who will answer that urgent question, which is like a mini statement. So she could send along David Davis, who plays a very good straight bat. He absorbs it, he takes it. But really, she will not do herself any favours if she doesn't go, because she's hiding.
So to answer Kevin's question to you then, Andrew, where does this leave Theresa May then?
Well, it's not easy. You can't put a gloss on this. This has been a bad day for her, because it was all supposed to be all so well choreographed, it was all briefed and it was all sourced. We all thought it was going to be that she would be making a fairly triumphant speech to the Commons tomorrow, and now it's one step forward, two steps back. It's not, and she's presumably incredibly frustrated because she thought she'd got the deal and something went wrong with the DUP and Arlene Foster. But I would say this though, Anna, look, Kevin's a veteran of Northern Ireland, covering Northern Ireland, the Anglo-Irish Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, all these things went right to the wire. Blair, Clinton. Northern Ireland politics is like no other part of the United Kingdom with respect, and I suspect still the deal will be done in time for the summit next week.
It might. You wouldn't rule it out, but I wouldn't bet the ranch on it. And you know, the old jibe in office but not in power is now made for Theresa May when you have the DUP tail wagging the Tory dog. That's not how it was supposed to be. In the Bung Parliament, you gave them £1 billion, expecting to turn up and rather faithfully vote for her. Well, they're flexing their muscles, and a lot of it's internal unionist politics, a lot of it's Northern Ireland politics. You're right, it's like no other part of the UK. It's totally fascinating in many ways.
So if there is no Irish border deal, are we leaving the European Union under World Trade Organization rules?
Well, if they couldn't do the deal, that's what would happen.
Look, they could, in theory, go almost close to solving the Irish question without solving it and talking about we'll have to do that in more detail and then move on to the trade talks as well. It's very possible.
But that's what Britain wanted in the first place.
Yeah,
because if you have regulatory alignment after a trade deal, you haven't got a problem with Northern Ireland.
David Davis said there would be a huge row.
He did say
over the sequencing, and then he agreed the sequencing,
he also
which
said,
is get the citizens' money in this out of the way.
There will be a huge row before the end of the year over the negotiations, and here it is.
Where's Liam Fox, who said these would be the easiest negotiations in history? Where's that Brexit?
He's fighting for traders all around the world. What I think interesting, the FT has picked out a very interesting line.
I think he was with an oboe or something earlier.
From the Irish Prime Minister, who said, quotes, "I find it inexplicable to be ready to table a proposal you haven't squared with your partner." But again, I think they thought they had squared it.
Yeah, but he will be, Leo Varadkar is in his own trouble. The Taoiseach had to get rid of his deputy. He said he wouldn't. He's playing hardball as well, and the unionists, the Democratic unionists, are playing hardball too. And how she budges them, I just don't think she's got the skills to do it. Tony Blair, with people like Jonathan Powell, Mo Mowlam, spent for the Good Friday Agreement, admittedly bigger than resolving this bit. Yeah, it took an enormous amount of effort and skill.
Let's bring in Trump. It'll all be solved.
Whoa!
Talk about petrol on a fire.
We're talking about Melania, I hope.
Exactly. We'd go wall to wall with it. It'd be great.
Yeah. That's a very good idea.
How to jazz up Brexit.
I'm going to tweet that.
You could.
Brexit will suddenly become very interesting.
Well, you could do it down McDonald's.
Yeah.
Exactly.